1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9. I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Then we're going to go over to chapter 3 and just look at verse 11. In the same way, women are to be worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. This is the word of the Lord.
And perhaps, Ros, just as you come up and I will pray for you, what is it you would be really hoping that we would be all taking away from today? If you could sum it up.
Yes, I mean, I think I said right at the beginning that what I really want is for you all to be excited about being women. And I think as we move towards the sort of more practical end of that towards the day, I really hope you go away feeling not just excited about being women, but actually having kind of positive and concrete ideas of the way in which the Lord wants you personally, individually, whatever your circumstances are, to live that out, to be, not just who you are, but the best possible version of the woman that he's made you, seeking out the greatest godliness, whatever the challenges are that you face.
Fantastic. Let me just pray for you as we go into this next talk. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you that each of our days has been written in your book, that you know our every move. And each of our days as a woman here on this earth, body and soul, has been written for you, for us by you. And Father, we pray that you would help us to take to heart the message that you now want to speak to us through your word. Thank you for Ros and the gifts that you've given her, that you can use to bless us and encourage us, just where our hearts need challenging and rebuking and encouraging and strengthening. Thank you for the food that you give us in this way. Amen.
Amen. Yes, when Corinne asked me for Bible readings for each session, and I sort of knew where the sessions were going to go, and particularly the first two sessions were based, on material that I'd written previously in different contexts and, put together for today. But I kind of had an idea of where, therefore, I wanted the Bible passages to go. But this one, I'm slightly regretting choosing 1 Timothy. We're not going to really deal with the controversial bits, so I'm like, I don't know why we had that read. Anyway, I'm sorry if you have questions about that, and you can ask me afterwards, but it's not really about whether women should be teaching in church or not in this session. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about holiness. Holiness is for all of us. There are no exemptions, and there are no excuses. In Christ, all of us, male and female, are called to the same path of discipleship, the same obedience, the same sacrificial way of life. Godliness isn't a competition, but if it were, we don't want the blokes to win. I mean, maybe it is a competition. In Romans 12, Paul tells the Romans to outdo one another in showing honor. So, I mean, maybe it is a competition. We want to outdo one another in our godliness. I haven't done the sums on this, but it seems to me, and I think it's right, that the vast majority of instructions and commandments about living in a way that honors God, living a godly life in the Bible, are addressed to both men and women. Most of the time, those instructions don't come with a sort of category of who they apply to. Men do this, women do that. In general, there is not a different standard of holiness for men and for women. We are all to be kind and loving, to be generous and forgiving. We're all to mind our language as much as we care about our actions. We are all to be compassionate, to count one another as better than ourselves, and so on. But there are places, and the one that came to mind was in 1 Timothy, and that's why we did have it read, where sometimes some instructions on holy living and wise living are addressed to particular groups, and sometimes to women in those groups. And it's not so much, I think, that holiness is different for men and women, as it is that women and men typically face different challenges to our holiness. There are some temptations we are more likely to be vulnerable to, and there are certain kinds of situations we are more likely to find ourselves in. And in very general terms, that may be because we are more likely to have certain kind of personality traits or lifestyles, differences in our bodies, to be living in a society that treats men and women differently. At the moment, I'm reading a book you may have come across. It's called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry for a book club that I'm in. She's not a Christian, and there is indeed plenty about her analysis that we would disagree with as Christians. But some of it is really eye-opening. In her chapter on rape, she points out that somewhere between 98 and 99% of all rape is committed by men. I think in the UK, the legal definition of rape means that it can only be committed by men, but she's clearly using a sort of broader definition of forced sexual activity. But even if you extend the definition in that kind of way, it's almost always men who commit that kind of crime. It's not that women can't. You know, we can commit violent crimes, we can commit sexual sin. And although many of us won't have the strength to physically force a man to have sex against his will, we all know there are other ways to compel people to act against their will, and women can be very good at that. Nevertheless, it does seem to be the case that very few women are ever tempted to, let alone put into practice, that particular sin. So I think we shouldn't be surprised that men and women experience our sinfulness in different sorts of ways, different kinds of temptations, because we are different. We have different bodies and we live different lives. And therefore, we sometimes find different instructions given to men and to women. So in the verses we had read for us, Paul is giving Timothy instructions for how women and men in the church should behave. And then in the second passage, how elders in the church and their wives should behave. In 1 Timothy 2, we're told that men should pray. Men should avoid quarrels and fights. Well, he's not saying women, you don't have to bother praying. Women, you get round the back and start having cat fights. Of course not. Of course not. It's not that women shouldn't follow those instructions as well. It tells women they should dress modestly and appropriately. Well, it doesn't mean men should start going out and finding the most ostentatious clothes they possibly can and dressing up with jewelry and doing weird things. The instructions aren't supposed to be exclusive, are they? But they are tailored according to who most needs to hear which particular thing. It seems like the men were forgetting to pray and instead they were getting into fights, so they needed to be warned about that. Maybe the women were dressing up to show off or possibly to make themselves more sexually desirable. That's what they needed to be warned about. It wasn't because there were different standards for men and women, but there were different temptations for men and women on the whole. Same kind of thing comes up again in chapter 3. It's not that the qualities needed for the wife were separate from the qualities expected of the husband. In fact, in some ways, they're the same. They're both warned to be sober-minded. The elder was to be respectful, while the wife was to be dignified. They're not a million miles apart, are they, being respectful and being dignified? But once again, the lists that are given indicate the kind of things that they needed to particularly look out for, because they were the ones most likely to be missing. The man must not be a violent drunk. Neither should the woman. The husband can't be a slanderer just because it's only the wife for whom that quality is made explicit. So I think in general we need to say any instruction for godly living applies to every one of us, even if it's not directly addressed to us. And we do need to be very careful about making assumptions in this area, because even where certain sins do have a gender bias, we are all vulnerable. I've heard a number of sermons over the years where the preacher has been addressing the subject of pornography. And pretty much without exception, that's an application that has been made largely to the men. Sometimes that's even been made explicit. Men, I'm speaking to you now. Women, this part of the sermon isn't really for you. The assumption is made that women never struggle with temptation to view pornography. But in reality, approximately a third of users of internet pornography are female. So yes, there's a gender bias, about twice as many men as women, but it's certainly not unheard of for women to be users of porn. And in the average congregation, I would expect there to be plenty. More men, probably, but still a sizable number of women. And the thing is, if you assume that that is not a problem for women, if you say this isn't really a problem for women, how much harder does it become for a woman who is struggling with that to admit it, to seek help? If you've been led to believe it's not the kind of sin that women struggle with, but you do, then surely you're the most sinful of all women. No. So let's not make assumptions that women don't struggle with this or men don't struggle with that. We're all capable of all kinds of sin. We're all sinners and we're all called to holiness. But I want to say, I think the biggest difference between men and women in the pursuit of holiness is not so much the kinds of sins and temptations we face, but the different way our lives cause us to experience them, by which I mostly mean the different ways men and women's hormones work. Thing I learned this year, did you know this? Men have a hormonal cycle. Oh yes, their hormones levels go up and down, and it impacts their moods and their executive function, and they can be tired and irritable and all the rest of it. The thing is, the male hormonal cycle, 24 hours. So pretty much every day they wake up at the same point. Every day they hit their low point at more or less the same time. Every day they get tired at the same kind of time. It's quite easy to plan around that, isn't it? It's quite easy to work out when it would be really helpful to say, right, I like a cup of coffee now, or I'm going to go for a run, or have a power nap. When it's going to be most effective if I'm on my own in the office getting on with stuff, or when it would be great to plan a meeting or do something creative, or when I'm going to have the energy for physical activity. And yeah, I mean, it would be really nice, wouldn't it, to be able to predict your days like that. 24-hour cycle. Wow. Women's lives, by contrast, from puberty onwards at least, are affected in a whole range of different ways by our hormones. For a long period of our lives, we're living within a menstrual cycle. Maybe it's 28 days long or 35 days. Or, you know, between my 40th birthday and my 50th birthday, mine varied anything between 3 and 16 weeks. It's quite difficult to plan around that. Just, you know, you never know. If you've gone through pregnancy, if you've given birth, your hormones will have gone through a huge change. If you're going through fertility treatment, if you're on the pill, your hormones are being artificially controlled. At some point you'll hit perimenopause or menopause or postmenopause, and your hormones go for another fun roller coaster ride. Yeah. I know I've been talking a lot today about women in the context of marriage and sex and childbearing, and not so much in the context of singleness. And I want you to know I am single. I'm 50 years old. I've just written in this in my notes. It says, I am 59 years old. I'm not. I am not. I am not. I am 50 years old, and I'm a virgin. And it can sometimes feel as though single women who are not having sex, women who are not having children, maybe even women who are attracted to other women, are not fulfilling the kind of God-given roles I've been talking about in revelation, in redemption, in living out the gospel. And I want to say you are. You absolutely are. None of us get to live out every aspect of womanhood. That's why it takes so many billion women to enact and embody what womanhood is, to be that revelation. Nobody gets to do that on their own in their whole life. And none of us get to experience every possible blessing from God. And it's wonderful to hear Romy talk about that, about her experience, and how wonderful that that did end for her with the birth of a child. But for many women, it doesn't. None of us get to experience every blessing that comes from God. But everyone who has a woman's body participates in God's purposes for women. We all get to experience the gospel lived out in our bodies. And I'm afraid that means we all get to live with female hormonal cycles. Lucky us. Our hormones are often very unpredictable. Some days we're absolutely fired with energy and enthusiasm for life, where we can take on the world. Some days we're irritable and grumpy for no obvious reason at all. On some days, maybe you just burst into tears at the drop of a hat. Other days, maybe you lash out in anger for the smallest thing. Our hormones have a huge impact on our emotional state, for some women more than others. Our hormones also have an impact on our mental and our physical capacity. Look, I know there are some women who will tell you the best way of dealing with menstrual cramps is to go for a run. And if that's you, good on you. For some of us, we can barely get out of bed. For a period of time, I used to suffer from menstrual migraines. I would feel nauseous, and all I could do was lie down in a dark room. And I think I mentioned this before, I literally could not parallel park when I had my period. Hormones affect us in all kinds of really weird ways, don't they? And all of those present a challenge to our godliness. We're supposed to live, in some ways, in the same way as men. We're supposed to be able to turn up for work and do the same job in the same way every single day of the month. But while every day is more or less the same for men, it's just not true for us, is it? Society's attitudes to pregnancy and motherhood have changed dramatically in the past 100 years, and indeed to singleness. Amongst the working classes, of course, women were always expected to work in the home and out of it, whether they were pregnant or not, whether they had small children to care for or not. But amongst the middle classes, it's not all that long ago that women were expected to just stop work as soon as they married. You certainly couldn't go to work if you were pregnant. The normal thing was that women would look after their own children rather than put them in nurseries and return to the office. But now, of course, we're supposed to want it all. It's hard, isn't it? I'm sure every one of you has a story to tell about ways in which it has been harder to live your life, whatever that has looked like, whether you've had a working career all your life, whether you're a single woman and have struggled to find a place to live that you can afford on your own, whether you've been a married woman and treated differently as such in the workplace. It's really not all that long ago that women were routinely and legally just paid less. Maybe you're a woman who's had children and you've had to go back to work while your breasts are still producing milk for your new baby. Or when you've just had a miscarriage. It's hard, isn't it, to try and have everything, to do everything. And a lot of that is because the expectation is we'll all be able to live our lives in the same way that men do. But we don't. About 18 months ago, I suddenly found myself forgetting all kinds of things. Emails I was supposed to send, or meetings I was supposed to be at, or tasks I should have done. And, I'm someone who's always had a really good memory. So I didn't have good systems in place for writing things down or setting reminders, because I would just remember until I didn't. And more than that, I found that when I was trying to write and think or, do anything that required my brain to be working in a good sort of way, it literally physically started to hurt. I'd always thought that was a metaphor when people says my brain hurts. Yeah, no, it's not. It hurts. And honestly, it was terrifying because I've always been a person who's relied on my mental capacity. That's what my job is based on. That's who I am, in large part, is identified by my academic capabilities. And suddenly I couldn't. There have been some physical symptoms of the menopause. I get a hot flush and I don't sleep brilliantly. But the impact on my brain capacity, my mental capacity, my executive function was absolutely terrifying. The other thing that happened was I just no longer had any kind of conversational filter at all. And I honestly, I spent about 6 months just proactively apologizing to people. I was just like, I just might say anything and please will you still be friends with me in a year's time? Because there seemed to be nothing that's normally there, to stop this stuff just coming out. Anyway, I am fortunate to be in a job which is pretty flexible, and I do have very, very understanding colleagues. My boss in particular has a wife who's my age and knows something of what I was going through. But many women don't have that, and the expectations are that we'll just be able to carry on as normal. Our hormones absolutely have an impact on our daily lives, and they therefore have an impact on our holiness. They make it harder to do the things that we want to do in a way that honors God. I still want to love my friends and say things that will be edifying to them and build them up in their faith. And yet sometimes I find myself blurting something out that I'm horrified by. And it's almost as though that's happening despite myself. It's not true. We mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that our hormones are separate from us, that somehow we can't be held responsible for what we do or say or think when we're going through those kind of hormonal changes. Our bodies are part of who we are, and therefore our hormones are part of who we are. So when you're on your worst day of PMT, or the menopause has just hit you like a block, or you're experiencing postpartum depression, or every stage in between, you are still you. You are not just the person that you are on a good day. You are not just the person you are when you're feeling great. You are also the person you are when you are miserable and irritable and when you can go from angry to sobbing in a moment. Those are not things that just happen to us. Those things are us. And we have to learn how to be holy through those times as well. So here we get to the point of the day where I'm like, I really don't have the answers to this, and I certainly don't live this out in my life in any kind of model way. But I have thought about it a bit, and I have some suggestions on how we can pursue holiness no matter what is going on in our female bodies and souls that sometimes makes that more difficult. And so obviously the first thing to say is pray. Obviously it's the best thing to say, whatever the situation, whatever you're facing. But I think specifically for us, we do need to pray for the Spirit to put to death our sinful nature and lead us into righteousness. Because holiness is fundamentally a spiritual battle and not a medical one. Even if your hormones are being controlled to some extent medically, and right now I daily am thanking the Lord God for HRT patches, holiness is not something we can achieve without the Spirit's help. He knows better than we do the challenges we are going to face every day. He knows when suddenly you're going to be hit with, horrific cramps or headaches or, you're going to burst into tears. He knows those things. He knows what's going to happen to you. He knows how your body is going to change during the day. And so pray for him to help you as you face things that you don't know you're expecting, to do so in a godly way. Pray specifically, of course, if you know that it's likely to be a difficult day for you. Pray that the Lord won't lead you into temptation, but will deliver you from evil. Pray really concretely about those things. And secondly, linked with that then is prepare. Try to be prepared. I was useless at this, but I do think it's a good thing if you're somebody who knows when your period is likely to be due. You learn how those different stages as you go through the cycle affect you physically, emotionally, mentally. If you have some kind of flexibility in your job or in other aspects of your life, well, maybe think about when would it be good to plan to do different sorts of tasks or make different kinds of appointments. If you know that you're always irritable and quick to fly off the handle the day before your period starts, well, are you able to say, well, actually that day, I'm going to mostly try and be planning things that I'll do in the office on my own, or, that I'll just be cleaning the house on my own, rather than make that the day when you say, well, I'm going to meet 4 friends for coffee, or I'm going to, plan a team meeting, or I'm going to do this and that. I know we don't all have the kind of lives where we're in control of those things. But if you are, at least to some extent, well, at least try and think that through. And so if you're the sort of person that, can make a little mark on your diary that says, well, that's when I'm expecting to come on, then just wait before you put things in. Just think, do you know, I'm going to see if there's a better day I could put that in my diary for. Don't make life unnecessarily more difficult for yourself, as far as you're able to. At the very least, on your worst possible day, maybe that's not the day to say, oh yeah, no, I'd love to go and hang out with my mother-in-law. Or, that colleague who you just know gets on your nerves. Just say, do you know what, that's not a great day for me. Can we try a different time? Even if you don't have that kind of flexibility, you can also think about preparing in other ways. To be able to think, well, okay, as I look through this day, it's pretty chock-a-block, but I could take 5 minutes there. And do you know what I'm going to do, rather than just kind of scroll through my phone with those 5 minutes, is try and step away from everyone. Maybe I'll have a bar of chocolate and some painkillers, and I'll read the Bible, or I'll say a prayer, or I'll do something that will just help reset how things are going on this day. Maybe you have a friend, a colleague at work, or someone that you'll be spending the day with, and maybe just, there's a little signal. You say, I just need to duck out for 5 minutes, and know that they'll cover for you. Whatever it is, you think about your lives. Where are the crunch points that make it hardest? And what could you do to prepare for those moments to help you get through them in a better way? You don't have to give in to your hormones as if we have no control over them, as if we have no control over ourselves. You do. And we need the Lord's help with it. It's hard. But the more we learn how to do this, and the more we put this sort of thing in place and pray about it and plan about it, the easier it will become. Here's another thing that I think is a really important one. And certainly for me, this has been a really important one over the last 18 months or so. I think we need to learn to prioritize the how over the what. I think God is much more concerned with the way in which we do things, whether that's parenting or working or housework or friendships or whatever it is. I think he's much more concerned with how we do things than what things we do. He will be more pleased with you if you get through a day without losing your temper, if you show kindness and compassion, if you can be patient and forgiving, if you can be gracious and gentle, even if 90% of your to-do list gets left. I think all too often our priority is productivity. Every moment of every day must be filled with useful tasks. And I get it. every woman I know lives a busy life where there is a lot. That's not true. I know my mother. Most women I know live a busy life where there is a lot to fit in, and it can be really hard to see how we could reasonably do less. You definitely can do less, by the way. It'll be fine. And I think because of our busy lives, we get frustrated by our limitations. I don't know if you do this, but I definitely do. I make plans based on how I am at my best, on my maximum capacity. If I'm really well and really full of energy and excitement, I could write a book in a month. Please don't give me a contract with a deadline in a month, because actually I'm not at my best all day, every day. Weird, I know. And what we end up doing is sort of forcing ourselves into a life where we have to try and work at our maximum capacity, even when we aren't at our best, even when actually our capacity is much lower. And what we say is, if only there were more hours in the day, or if only we could be in 2 places at once, or if only I weren't feeling this rotten, and maybe I just need to take more pills or more painkillers or more whatever, and then I'll be able to do all the things I should be doing. There aren't more hours in the day. You can't be in 2 places at once. You are limited, not because you're female, but because you're human. Maybe our female bodies limit us in slightly different kinds of ways than men's, but that is a good thing. All of our limitations, all of our human, bodily, physical, emotional, and mental limitations are a good thing. They are a feature of being human. They are not a bug. God didn't make us to be everywhere, to do everything. Why not? Well, because he's the one who's everywhere. He's the one who can do everything. He makes us limited so that we are forced to trust him. We are forced to hand things over to him. I mean, Romy said, she can't be in control of the whole world. And I'm quite glad that you're not trying to be. I can't be in control of the world, and I'd be great at it. I mean, I wouldn't. But, there are some things I'd be great at. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing that I don't even have to try. So embrace your limitations. Don't try and do that by comparing someone. Well, she manages to do all of this. So, my to-do list looks a lot shorter than hers. So, probably I should try and fit in. No. She's probably, working herself to burnout over there. Don't follow her. Do less. You are not made primarily for productivity. You are made to glorify God. You are not a machine honed for maximum output. You are made to live in faithful obedience to him. What does that mean? Well, it means being loving and joyful, peaceful and patient, kind and good, gentle and faithful and self-controlled. There's nothing in there about how often you hoover the floor or clean your tumble. I mean, who cleans their tumble dryer? I'll tell you who. My mother, I'm never going to let her listen to this. My mother, the morning after she gets out of hospital, that's who cleans the tumble dryer. You know what? If there are days where you literally do nothing that you have planned, that's okay. And it's more than okay if you did that in ways that were loving and joyful. It's far better than if you'd got through to the bottom of your list, grumbling and bitter, angry, frustrated. So I'm not saying when you have that kind of hormonal hump that you should just take the day off, although sometimes maybe you should. But what I'm saying is that your priorities might be in the wrong place. Focus on how you do the things God has set before you to do that day. And let God be the judge of whether you've had a good day, rather than worrying about what other people will think. I haven't written it down here. Oh, no, I have. There we go. Look, I obviously also thought this before. On which note, I think it is enormously helpful to be honest with other people. I had something different in mind, but I'm going to say this. I think it's really important that we're honest with each other about how little we actually can usefully do. Don't try and have competitions about how productive your days are and how you fill every moment for this and you can squeeze in this. And don't even do that about other people. Isn't she amazing? She's always got time for X, Y, and Z. Don't celebrate that in a person. Celebrate their godliness. Isn't it amazing how she's always so gentle, how she's always got time to let people share their needs with her, how she cares more about people than getting the things done. You know, she's so compassionate, she's so patient. Those are the things we should celebrate about each other, not our to-do lists. What I actually was going to say about this, it is enormously helpful to be honest with other people. I think sometimes it's really helpful to be honest with other people about how we are struggling. And obviously there are limits to that. You don't need to tell everyone the moment that you find out you're pregnant, or you know, you probably don't want to tell your boss how awful your messy periods are, or, you know, whatever. But where it is appropriate to do so, I think it is really good to be able to explain honestly, you're finding certain things quite tricky today. I think you certainly, if you're married, need to be able to share those things with your husband. Actually, today is not the day where we're going to be able to have a sensible conversation about X, Y, and Z. I know it's really important, but let's not do it today because I'll just cry. It won't get us anywhere. Let's wait. Probably share some of those things with your close friends. Actually, I really struggle because I find it makes me react like this and this and this. Do you find that? Oh yeah, totally. Be honest with each other, be open with each other, and actually help one another. Maybe somebody has really great advice, thing that helped them. But if not, pray with each other. Let's say, okay, let's try and do that differently next time. Let's try and help each other. Let's see, how did you get on? We shouldn't be ashamed of having women's bodies, and we shouldn't be ashamed of talking about those bodies, especially where they do have an impact on how we relate to other people. We should be able to seek help from our churches in pursuing holiness. So probably at least some people in your church, probably not everyone, certainly not your vicar from the pulpit, needs to be able to tell you when actually I've noticed you slipping into a pattern of sinfulness that seems to just be around the same time every month. It's helpful, isn't it, when other people can see those things and be honest with us about them. So I said I haven't got all the answers, and I really don't, but I do think we need to acknowledge that this is a particular way in which we face challenges to our holiness. It is not good enough to be able to just say, there's nothing I can do about that. That was my hormones. It's just that time of the month. I'm menopausal. Obviously, I'm going to get grumpy. No. It's not okay. It's not good enough. That is our challenge, is how to be holy always. Pray about it, prepare for it, prioritize your holiness over your productivity. Be open and honest about it and seek help. You may have other thoughts about that, and maybe we're going to have Q&A a little bit later in this session, and maybe you want to ask more about those kind of things then, or offer wisdom for the rest of us. That would be terrific.